Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, founded in 2016 by Dawn Lundy Martin and Terrence Hayes, is a creative think tank for African American and African diasporic poetries and poetics. Our mission is to highlight, promote, and share the work of Black poets and to pollinate cross-disciplinary conversation and collaboration. Our programming aims to present exciting live poetry and conversation, contextualize the meaning of that work, and archive it for future generations. The work of the Center is vital at this particular time, when so many Black poets are at the forefront of contemporary American poetry. African diasporic poets are pushing the envelope of poetics and expressions of Blackness through art. Though some attention has been paid to the fact of Black poetry, there has been little discussion of what the diverse Black poetries of this particular moment mean and do. In a climate of renewed attention on racial disparities and systematic violence against African Americans and other people of color, the Center is focused on a poetics of engagement in relation to this historic moment and with an eye toward moments to come. Since our inception, we have hosted world-renowned poets, visual artists, architects, filmmakers, and scholars, including Claudia Rankine, Fred Moten, Thaddeus Mosley, Carrie Mae Weems, Ross Gay, Carl Phillips, John Keene, LaToya Ruby Frazier, Lorna Simpson, Arthur Jaffa, and Christina Sharp. These are just a handful of the esteemed guests who have visited CAP in various capacities over the past 3 years. There are 4 MacArthur Genius Award winners among them. Our community partners are crucial to our mission. Poets and writers are featured on campus, but they also visit our community partners in their constituencies, often leading hands-on workshops in intimate settings in historically Black neighborhoods, such as the Hill District in Homewood. Through this engagement, we not only bridge the gap between the university and the community, but we elevate and expand the work that poetry can do. Good evening, everyone. I'm so thrilled about this kickoff event. My name is Dawn Lundy Martin, and I'm a professor in the English department at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm the director for the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. Welcome to the kickoff event for our week of innovative and exciting programming. I think it's innovative and exciting, titled Withness, a CAP Black study on intimacy. And in that withness, we have the H in a parenthetical fashion, so it has multiple meanings. We emerge now from the wreckage, but we're still in the wreckage. We emerge from seclusion and the derangement of apartness. We continue our centuries-long practice of protest at the blunt end of unyielding, racist, and misogynist terror. This terror invades our spaces of safety and belonging sometimes. It's everywhere, so we gotta be bobbing and weaving, taking full advantage of liminal spaces and shit, and creating our own transformative languages of resistance. Let's not flail out there alone. Let us be with each in creative practice and eschew the illegitimate narratives that seek to batter our imaginations and suck our energies. What I am proposing by that is that being with and being witness are ways toward the destruction of that status quo I just mentioned, that well-worn territory of doing things, those that some people call traditions. Being with and witness are ways, I think, towards something new. Newness is not impossible, but to get there, we have to turn everything on its head. Let us focus on the kinds of epistemologies or knowledges that are made possible when we centralize the imagination of Black people. That's one of the many things I love about when our sister organizations came waiting for us, but there are 4 mother organization, Cave Canem, the retreat for Black poets, is one of the things I love about them. It's by Black people and for Black people. It's diasporic. Let us focus on centralizing the imaginations of Black people as a key condition from which intimacy might emerge. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about what changes when we center Black thought, Black creativity, how the whole epistemological regime is shifted when we do that. It's flipped inside out. Because what's underneath these current ways, what I call the regime, is a belief that the natural way of the world centers European thought and creativity. And look where that's gotten us. Tonight, we feature 3 writers and artists whose work call us to remember the power and elasticity of the imagination, how crucial it is, what's possible there in this centralizing of Black thought and Black activity. These artists are Amma, Josephine, B. Johnstone, Cyrus Cassells, and Phoebe Boswell. They will share their work in that order that I just mentioned. And then after, there'll be a conversation and there'll be some time for audience Q&A. So if you do have a question anywhere along the way, please hit the ask a question button and put your question there. Before I introduce Amma, who's up first and who will also help moderate the conversation, I want to thank our sponsors. Obviously, I have to thank our sponsors. I want to thank the Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences and the Dietrich Foundation for their foundational and continued support. We're also grateful to Pittsburgh Arts Conservancy and Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures for their co-sponsorship this week. I also want to mention my deep gratitude to Stephan Triplett, who's the CAP Interim Assistant Director, without whom none of this would be possible. Thanks also to Alexis Jabor, our sound engineer for the evening, our tech and production person for our online events. And lastly, I want to thank our new CAP graduate student assistant, Kay Henderson, and all the CAP faculty affiliates, especially Andrew Cruz, who helped imagine this fall's programming. I want to thank you all for dreaming with us, and thank you all in the audience for dreaming with us and continuing to come to our online and in the next few days in-person events. This is Amma. Not yet. I'm going to read her bio. Amma Josephine B. Johnstone is a researcher, artist, and pleasure activist whose work navigates intimate explorations of race, art, ecology, and feminism, working to activate movements that catalyze human rights, environmental evolutions, and troublesomely queered identities. I love that. Amma is a PhD candidate in psychosocial studies with Dr. Gail Lewis at Birkbeck, where her research takes a queer decolonial approach to challenging, rethinking Black climate changed futures and a particular focus on inherently environmental pleasure practices in Ghana and across the Black diaspora. Amma is the 2020-2021 Keith Haring Fellow in Art and Activism at Bard College in New York, a curatorial fellow with Frame Contemporary Art Finland and EVA International in Limerick, and is currently exhibiting work across the United Kingdom. Please join me in welcoming Amma Josephine B. Johnstone.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for that beautiful introduction and for all the incredible work that's happened behind the scenes to make this conversation happen, to work out if it was going to be in real life or online. I'm incredibly honored to be here in such phenomenal company with Phoebe and Cyrus. So I'm going to dive right in. And I have a slight cold, so you'll have to bear with me if I have to stop and cough and drink water. And this is what, I don't know, this is what care looks like. And this is what capitalism also looks like. So I'm going to read from a new speculative work called Moonies that was commissioned by the Royal College of Art in London by a professor called Josephine Berry after sharing as part of their representation series. So really thinking through actually kind of forms of this idea of witness and visualizing and aestheticizing witness and who we're being with in non-lip servicey ways, I suppose. So I'm going to dive right in, and this is part of a new publication that's coming out later on this year. Moonies. Do you know how quickly a species can adapt to entirely different environmental conditions? 2 generations. So whilst my great-grandmother may have looked a little like humans as you think of them, she'd likely have taken one look between my mother's bleeding thighs before running down to the river to drown me. But 2 generations are ancient history out here, where our elders are under 40, and a legacy is making it through the night. For the half that survive initiation, anyway. I'm 14 moons out of that ritual, still young by our standards, but ripe and ready for my first hruga. In so many ways, I've been preparing for this all my life. My skin darkens every day, gradienting from its naturally rich brown sheen to something closer to true black, the most sacred of our hues. My non-essential bodily functions slow down, my speed, agility, and external senses heightening, my large eyes bright blue orbs, forever dilated to caress and pass the shadows. A heat builds in my lower abdomen as everything within me concentrates on preparing this body for life. My smooth, hairless scalp gleams a little in the starlight, the skin harder there, as the harder bone that tips my wiry fingers and thumb, enriched with vitamins and oils, all primed to attract, to entice, to fecundate. But what am I doing? Rambling on as though we're not skidding towards moonrise like rats in an oil chute ready to be turned into a protein-rich mash. I'm joking, of course, we don't actually eat rodents. That's just more propaganda. But you knew that already, or you wouldn't be here fraternizing with the enemy trying to see up our skirts. I've got a long way to go to the other side of the city, and it's a bright one. It's not that it doesn't burn the light. It's that we're used to it, which doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It means we haven't any other choice. Like a chicken egg hatching in the belly of a snake. I'm still not sure this is a good idea, letting one of you in. It galls that we'll experience this for the first time together, that there are things I don't yet know about our people that we'll discover in tandem. The elders might think it's time to try for a truce, but I'm not at all convinced. What's to stop you using tonight to finish us off? The child I could conceive may never even see the sky if this all goes to hell. It's cold, and the old moss-covered tiles are cracked and clattering beneath my feet as I scale rooftop after rooftop, headed towards the old overpass. Somewhere below, I think of children waking with a start, shadowy thoughts clouding their dreams of monsters that go bump in the night, and wayward creatures beyond their ken. My talons dig in deeper, turning their dilapidation to my advantage, shifting my weight into a spring as I loop a lamppost that groans momentarily under the weight, just to revel in my own youth and strength. The moon stabs in for the millisecond we're face to face, and her bite is like the beating of a lover or a parent, familiar and anticipatory. Then I'm down and I'm running, the rumble of triple-layered blackened out hoverboxes transporting the wealthy and their lackeys out the backside of a day long since ended. And I hiss in disgust and rage at their trespassing in our territory, the night. Their headlights flash a pure, unfiltered, sickly grey. We no longer see in colour. We see so much more. We are taught from youth to run through the city, even clothed by our beloved darkness. Above ground, we're safest in flight. But it's more than that. Adrenaline pumping, muscles engorged and humming to attention. We feel most alive in motion, flickering like moon shadows through a world at once ours and not. We whisper in the afterglow of futures postponed, yet what has risen out of the interlude defies your wildest dreams. Used needles litter the gutters, marking another inoculation day. I suppose that's another difference between us. We see what the night is doing to our skin, our hair, our eyes, our desires even. You've no idea what the drugs are doing to you. How can you even tell what it is you believe and what the spikers tell you is true? When was the last time your people stepped outside, unveiled, bare to the judgments of the sky, just to see what would happen? And clearly the drugs are not working anyway. You are evidence enough of that. The Kruger happens every 6 moons in one of our 9 mother houses. We can gestate farther than you can in only 6 to 7 months, so this works out the safest for those who experience successful joinings. Of course, I have a host of lovers, both in and out of my nest, but it takes at least 1/10 of us to make babes. That was one of the first things we discovered, the power of fucking in numbers. It's strange to be punished for who your ancestors were and yet be born into a world that doesn't believe in you, that doesn't believe we can even exist. You thought we would die when you cast us into the moonless night, or at best die out within a generation. What could a group of sinful women do alone, unwed, unguarded, and uninoculated, in a world that had long since decided our species were a plague to be culled at all costs, if not entirely wiped out? Fornicate themselves to death if they didn't burn first? You never believed we might not only survive, but thrive. Never believed being thrown out of Eden might be the closest thing to freedom we could have hoped for. I'm nearly there now, just a final riverbed to cross. I take the aerial route, leaping out into nothingness, my sharp eyes gauging distances held secret to your gaze, leathered fingers grasping at the corrugated iron rungs of the bridge, swinging like a spider monkey 600 feet above the ground. Some rungs are rusted through and some are barely there at all. I remember most of these and avoid them by rote. Most of them. But that's all part of the fun, feeding the desperate need to prove my aliveness, to prove my existence outside of captivity. Just as you live confined by such hatred and discomfort to prove you are holy, are righteous, to prove you are not us, so we live close to the edge of being, walking the sharpest blades of the night, to prove that we are not you. This side of the river is desolate, your scarcity leaving room for other life forms to creep up and explode in unexpected places and configurations. I move less cautiously. I'm close. I can feel the others, and it's like an ache in my guts and between my thighs. It's already beginning. Are you sure you're ready for this? Last shot to back out. No second chances. That's how we live out here. No second chances. Then I'm here, and so are you. 2 rivers meeting. Your faux black hooded cloak stands out against the true dark like a foal in the moonlight, pale and defenseless. The shock of your presence ripples through my already tightly wound nervous system. I've prepared myself for this. I thought I had anyway, but maybe there is no preparation to be had. Every inch of you etched with memories of genocide, hatred, and fear, the things you did to stop us from being who we are, what we are, for believing all that we believe, from loving who we love. Even now, we all cradle chasms within us, those you have taken, tortured, experimented on, then discarded, cut open and brutalized, bodies where you left where you knew we would find them, unsubtle warnings coated in your impotence, as though we needed a reminder of the power of your cruelty. Anger surges, taking heart from the fire already boiling in my belly, and I could just reach out to undo your guts from flesh with a single hooked hunting claw. The fury is fresh and alive in me, deliciously soothing the pain, but tonight is not for that. No, tonight is for pleasure. And even you, forced here out of desperation, I know, whatever your pretty words might say, even you cannot stop that. Without words, I drop down before you, reveling in the extra foot of height and the dark has granted, our curves stretched and evening out under the ossifying moon gaze. You jump in surprise and more, and it pleases me, feeding the arousal that quickly gobbles down my rage. Without a word, I walk on and sense you falling in behind me. You bring with you the power of sovereignty, you said, a promise to end persecution, but I don't believe you can represent more than a small number of your leaders, when so much of what you are is built on disavowing that any life other than yours is sentient or worthy of breath. And this feels like too high a price to pay for empty words. This is the only thing we have that you want, or at least that you say you want. Your breath quickens again, and I suspect even you can hear it now. The moaning and ululations, the undoing rhythms of our sacred drums. We pass out of the crevice corridor and into a wide courtyard basked in moonlight. At last, I lower my hood, gasping in unison with you as the rays meet flesh with an icy, burning lick of light. Your shock fills the air, fresh blood in the water. I want to look up and howl just to see if it would push you over the edge. But I won't interrupt the drummers now, not when my own need is so great. The spider-webbed canvas cradling the otherwise open space allows just enough light through to feel all but bright as day to us. And you must stay hooded as you lurk in the shadows, hugging the walls, aware perhaps at last of what it is we are sharing, of how completely you are not supposed to be here. I wonder if you can feel anything other than shame, or if the drums stir your loins as well. Even you do not thrive in captivity. I bear my undulating body, blackness lithe and liquid, and leave you far behind. Duty done. I am embraced by a croon of limbs, hungry to sate my hungers. Why are you so afraid of this? It's only fucking, isn't it? Only loving, isn't it? Only kinship, isn't it? Only a billion molecules of moonstruck stardust, still aching to belong. Thank you.
Wow, Amma, thank you so much. That was like my top of my head is blown off.
Thank you.
Oh my God, that was so amazing. I'm just like really lingering in these questions around like, how pleasure, especially like sexual pleasure, can kind of do something to destabilize cruelty. Amazing. So thank you. And thank you for the extra effort, even though you're not feeling well. And folks don't know, but Amma is actually in the UK. So it's also the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Gratitude.
All of that. Thank you
Gratitude.
so much. It was an honor to share.
Right. I'm going to introduce Cyrus Cassells next, and I'm going to read the official bio, but I do want to just say that Cyrus Cassells is one of those poets. He didn't know this because he doesn't remember because it was 1,000 years ago, who made me want to become a poet. When I was an undergraduate studying at the University of Connecticut in Storrs, I studied with Marilyn Nelson, and we were reading some of Cyrus Cassells' work. And Marilyn invited Cyrus to class. I think this must have been after his first book, The Mud Actor. So I am in deep gratitude as well to Cyrus and his work. Cyrus is the author of many books and has one forthcoming. It's titled The World That the Shooter Left Us. And it's coming out from Four Way Books. I think we can pull up, I think we're going to do a little cover reveal here and pull up the image of that book. Yes, there it is. This is the first time anyone besides like Cyrus and the publishers have seen the cover. So you're welcome. I believe that Cyrus is going to read from that collection this evening. Cyrus Cassells is the author of The World That the Shooter Left Us, coming out from Four Way Books, 2022. Also, he's author of More Than Watchmen at Daybreak, published in 2020. The Gospel According to Wild Indigo, published in 2018. The Crossed Out Swastika, published in 2012 by Copper Canyon. More Than Peace and Cypresses, also Copper Canyon. Beautiful Senor, also Copper Canyon from 1997, and it won the Lambda Literary Award. Soul, Make a Path Through Shouting, which was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize and received the William Carlos Williams Award. And the book that I read when I was a young poet, The Mud Actor, which was published by Henry Holt and won the National Poetry Series selection. It was a National Poetry Series selection. Cassells is the recipient of a 1995 Pushcart Prize. My tongue gets tied. The Peter I.B. Lavin Younger Poets Award. He's received fellowships from the Lannan Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts. He's worked as a translator, film critic, actor, and teacher. He is a 2019 Guggenheim Fellow and lives in Austin, Texas, and teaches at Texas State University. Please join me in welcoming poet, actor, translator, Cyrus Cassells.
Hi, everyone. Dawn, thank you for that incredible introduction. And it's just a reminder for all of us writers that we never know how our work or our presence is going to affect another person, another poet there. And thanks for sharing the cover reveal of the book, The World That the Shooter Left Us. I'm actually going to be sharing poems from another book, which I wrote at exactly the same time. And this book is called Is There Room for Another Horse on Your Horse Ranch? So the poems that are coming out in February are the most political work I've ever done. At the same time, I was writing these more intimate, very sort of celebratory, fun poems that I'm going to share this evening. And these are, I'm going to read four. They're engagement / honeymoon poems there. And I think that's all you need to know for the first one. This one's called You Be the Dancer. In the small hours under Taurus, let's go back to adoring the soul of the moon-bathed hill. Whether we're feeling frisky, empty-handed, or still beguiled by inchoate dreams, let's revisit the cornerstone hour when all of 12 I confessed my preening babysitter in his detestable paisley cap and sun-faded overalls forced me to be his faux Valentine. And in a risk-taking gambit, you grasped my shaky hand and led me to this spellbinding hill with its exhilarating shouts of sage and cinquefoil. Long ago, amid pert rosemary flowers, I had my first authentic kiss. I don't count the bully. My first Cuban cigar, not the counterfeit bubblegum kind. As brash, brand new acolytes, we had no elucidating word for the hothouse link between us. Bud Green Romeo and Romeo, we were blundering interns, more like callow troubadours, meeker and cautious navigators of the flesh. Can you worship a place the way the avid Romans once revered their tutelary gods? Look, here's our unmistakable boxwood, the blue star juniper. Sorry, I'm having a little problem moving the night silvered belvedere, revealing the acrobatic river and the bumpkin town we were so hell-bent to leave. I'm sure I could whip up a passable map, a crude miniature of this facile to memorize hill, our hush-hush stronghold, or better still, an apt pirates or scallywags design, reclaimed a century or two from today, with a conspicuous X marks the spot, leading its lucky finder directly to our talismanic hill. And yes, this pulse-altering place was tantamount to an idyllic schoolhouse. You praised like a pimpled Solomon my terrific lashes, my magnetic tea-brown eyes, and taught me to dance up here. Mashed potato, locomotion, frug, and shimmy. And thus, mon amour, I found my métier. You started calling me dancer, and the puckish nickname stuck. I became the nimble boy all the doting 8th grade girls desired on the auditorium dance floor. But with you, I was a clandestine dancer. Then, in a dash, years passed, some bereft of any word of you, some brimming with up-to-the-minute bulletins of your escapades, blazing hopes and accomplishments. Home now, standing on our fail-safe hill, I insist, baby, it's worth our while coming back, despite the old boredom, secrecy, and blatant bullying. After relishing the compass star's clarity, the glittering river's ballet. You laugh and cajole. I definitely prefer the grown-up you, but wonder, can you still manage a cartwheel and, dare I ask, the Batusi? Transformed by winnowing time's wand into a biting, gray-bearded remnants, burly truther bust men, we laugh in disbelief. Look at us. I can't believe we're lovers again after 60. And on this allaying hill, hemmed with showy Mars red berries, littering a reflecting creek, the hallow summer night, the ecstatic hour of our homecoming winds the way a caduceus winds and heals. Of course, I'll marry you. Here's another engagement poem. It's called I'll Take You to Africa. It's actually part of the Gospel According to Wild Indigo sequence of 18 poems. And the sequence is organized around the Gullah word for sunrise, which is day, clean. But this engagement poem takes place at sunset. So it's talking about day lean. I'll take you to Africa. Day lean. The telltale marshes take the last gallivanting gold and give away crimson, and for a brief while, quiet as it's kept, even the sternest trees seem to curtsy and be set ablaze by the razzle-dazzle sun's adieu, after love's bodacious vowels and the agile sorcery of dusk-sharing blackbirds. It's this marriage of sundown hues and marshland shadows that moves us to speak. High in a lark-haunted, boy-loved oak, one humming lover soothes the other's glistening nape with a hand-shaped fan, then whispers, if you wear this ring, I'll take you to Africa. Two black men together make a dipper sweet singing, a jump the broom bounty. Day lean, sun like a wedding cake tucked beneath a pillow. This next poem is called Winter Pillow Book number 3. One of the things about me was I minored in Japanese literature and fell in love with Shei Sonogon's famous Pillow Book. And one thing you might not know or need to know is that it alludes to the great, late great activist Harvey Milk, who came to my campus when I was 21 and talked about coming out and came with a film about coming out there. And I got a chance to celebrate my 21st birthday with him. Our birthdays were a few days apart. So that was a high point in my life and something that affected my willingness to become a writer in person, was meeting with Harvey Milk. So this is actually a fairly erotic poem. And I'm pushing a little bit. I wanted to write about orgasm. It's called Winter Pillow Book number 3. And it's a honeymoon poem. Winter Pillow Book number 3. All my soulmate's IOUs were sensual, and his galvanizing cock fit my eager grip like a scepter might. Don't tell me a man's fabled G-spot is merely a fancy ruse, elusive folklore, a Loch Ness monster? Confession, when I came clean for the 4th stupefying time from his on-tap prowess, his ne plus ultra kisses, it was as elating as my 21st birthday hug from Mr. Harvey Milk. And in our post-coital splendor, out of the super subtle blue, tousled honeymooners, we began to whistle for no particular reason, as if to forestall the blizzard's wind-hurled volleys, the regimental sea march from the bridge over the River Kwai. As first the dead of winter metropolis, then the whole vaunted visible world, Lord have mercy in our amassing wonder, turned egret white. No idea why we started whistling that, but it was part of the whole beautiful experience. And my last poem is actually an elegy, but it has a lot of romantic memories in it. And parts of it are set in California, where I grew up, and parts of it are set in northwestern Spain, where we traveled together. It's called Altitude. You've just died in my arms, but suddenly it seems we're eternal Cali boys, afro-haired cohorts in crime, racing through intricate lattices of quince and lemon tree shadows, corridors of Queen Anne's lace. On the Skip Church Sunday, you dubbed me Sir Cyrus instead of Cyrus. Then, swift as a deer's leap, were devotees of goatees and showy Guatemalan shirts, intoxicated lovers for a month on the northwest coast of Spain, praising the irrepressible sounds of a crusty Galician bagpiper on La Coruña's gripping Finisterre, then gossiping and climbing like the giddy Argonauts we were, the lofty, ancient Roman lighthouse, all the way, keep on trucking, we sang, to the top of the Tower of Hercules. Thanks, everybody.
Cyrus, amazing. Thank you. So beautiful. I continue to learn from you about lots when it comes to poetry, but about the power of the lyric for sure, and the possibility really for rendering a kind of revolutionary love, I guess, in poetry. So beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then, you know, things I don't want to learn about, maybe like men's G-spots. But, you know, here we are. We're coming together.
It was an experiment how far I could go. It turns out my first publisher, Judy Carrison of Mud Actor, was the one who was the editor for the G-Spot book back then. But
oh, I got you. Okay.
Awesome.
Love it. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Right. I could not be more honored to introduce Phoebe Boswell. I'm a huge fan of her work. And I know that you will be too if you don't already know it. I'm sure there are many of you in the audience who already know it and who've come to see and experience more. Phoebe Boswell's figurative and multidisciplinary practice denotes a commitment of care for how we see ourselves and each other. Underpinned by a porous diasporic consciousness, she explores notions of interpersonal freedom, protest, grief, intimacy, migration, embodiment, and world making through the prism of race and gender, collective histories, and possible futures. Working intuitively across media, she centers drawing, but spans animation, sound, video, writing, interactivity, performance, and chorality to create layered, immersive installations which affect and are affected by the environments they occupy, by time, the serendipity of loops, and the presence of the audience. Boswell's drawings, installations, and film and video works have been exhibited internationally and are held in collections, including the UK Government Art Collection, the BFI National Archive, and the Studio Museum in New York. Her practice has received accolades, including the Future Generation Art Prize's Special Prize in 2017, the Paul Hamlin Foundation Award for Artists in 2019. She is a Ford Fellow and was the Bridget Riley Drawing Fellow at the British School at Rome in 2019. She will soon unveil a newly commissioned work for Prospect P5 in New Orleans and currently lives and works in London. Please welcome Phoebe Boswell.
Hello, Dawn. Thank you so much. It's a complete honor to be here, and I'm not entirely sure how to to follow Cyrus and Amma. So I'm a bit frazzed. I'm a bit kind of blown away by what you've both shared. But I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to share my screen, if I may. 1 second. Share screen. No. Is that working? Can you all see that? Yes. Okay. So I thought very long as to what I wanted to share here tonight. And I landed upon these drawings of my mum that I'm currently grappling with in my studio. No one has seen them yet, really, and they are utterly unfinished. So it is intimate, even in the sharing. And I feel somewhat vulnerable sharing them with you, but it does seem like the space for it. So be nice. I spent the last year and a half, however long it's been, mostly alone. I live alone and my family is scattered. And I was told early on to shield as I am potentially at severe risk of COVID. So I've stayed put in Southeast London since early March 2020, when I landed at Heathrow from JFK with a hangover after dancing all night with some artists and some strangers in a sweaty basement in Harlem, rubbing up against one another, celebrating the end of the Armory. I landed back in London, and it was wildly visceral how the world seemed to abruptly break. So I sheltered in place. My neighbors, who I never thought to meet, became a lifeline. My view became a person. People became pixels. My work schedule cascaded as show after show was either cancelled or postponed, and the realization that no one was really going to be looking at what I was doing for the foreseeable kicked in. I developed rituals. I breathed deep. I started eating porridge. Eventually, but not immediately, I drew. I moisturized a lot. It was a time to be still, to look inwards, to breathe, to explore myself, to determine what mattered to my spirit. My mum was the first person who entered my home after a year and stayed with me for about 11 weeks. It was in that time we had to re-know each other. I had to recenter my little cocoon, to make space, without the world to distract us, but after a bewildering year where we both had undoubtedly changed, we had to re-see each other and ourselves. And honestly, it was hard for both of us. How do we attend to intimacies that claw? Intimacies in transition, intimacies in growth, intimacies when the heart feels abandoned. How do we make intimacy in distance, after distance? I started to draw her a couple of days after she left. Just prior, I set up 2 stools and a camera, and I put it on a stop motion timer so it photographed us every 10 seconds as we chatted. It was lovely. A couple of days before, I noticed her daydreaming, drinking tea. I photographed her then too. She looked so peaceful and so troubled at once. She felt so near and yet so impossibly far away at once. Impenetrable and yet entirely a part of me, or me of her, at once. As Nayira Waheed says, our mother is our first country, the first place we've ever lived. I never used to be able to draw my mum. It was a kind of running joke growing up, as we realized early that drawing was my thing, and drawing people particularly so. And I really thought I could draw anyone, but never her. I never managed to get a sense of her, her essence, her character. Her features through my mark making were always clumsy, awkward, just a little bit in the wrong place. Like maybe I knew her face too well, or perhaps not at all. Or perhaps I saw too much of it, too much of myself, perhaps. I used to draw my sister Freddie without even seeing her because we're that symbiotic. I used to love drawing my dad. I was fascinated by his face and the stories it held. When I made the matter of memory a work about both my parents, about home, Kenya, or trying to find it, trying to find my place in it through their memories, I relished in these two drawings of Dad, his head looking forward to some sort of future, his head looking back at the weight of the past. For balance, I drew Mum too, but I drew her feet, grounded. I was thinking about place, placelessness, the intellectualizing of place that goes on in my dad's head, colonialism, coloniality, white guilt, where his Kenyanness is always mired by the historic brutality of his Englishness. But the same Kenyanness, I reasoned, grew out and through my mother's feet. I inherit some of both and neither of any when it comes to home. But that's another paper. Of course, the less poetic reason was I simply couldn't draw her head. The Matter of Memory was an immersive installation that recreates my grandmother's living room in Kenya and fills it with the drawn, animated, sculpted, and oral stories, memories from both my parents, my Kikuyu mother and fourth generation British Kenyan father, that speak of the intimacy of a shared and layered history, the brutality of that history that exists like a dying elephant in the room, but also the intimacy of familial love. And to quote Yvette Gressler in her review of the work, the critical significance of human subjectivity and memory work as a counterpoint to the tyranny of singular, overarching narratives. In the center of the room are two armchairs. In one, you can hear my father's voice, in the other, my mother's, both telling stories of their childhoods in Kenya. I transcribe their words, including ums, ahs, sighs, and song, and record myself speaking them as a way of taking ownership of their memories of Kenya for lack of my own. It was an act of deep love, a resistance of erasure, of forgetting, an urgency to hear my voice re-speaking their words. It's an act of taking ownership, of saying the things I have been unable to say. It was important for me to lash my tongue around words of violent colonialism. It was important for me to feel the intake of breath and the heavy thud of words that attest to the weight of guilt and shame my father feels for the history he was born into, which I share but do not bear on my shoulders. It was important for me to curl my lips around the confident way my mother says that she's a Kenyan. She'll always be a Kenyan. So even if she never lives in Kenya again, it doesn't really matter because her Kenyanness is not in question. This was a seminal work for me. In it, I wanted to find myself somewhere between their two stories, between the Kikuyu corners and the English edges. Of course, life isn't like that. People, we are edgeless, really, especially when it comes to love. Years later, I'm invited by the showroom in London to create some performances for Collective Intimacy, a live program that coincided with Fiasta Gates's Black Image Corporation with Prada. I focused on women reading together, the act of us coming together with our chosen gospels and figuring out how and what it means to read together in space. My mother again was in London. On her last day, I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to use one of these performance opportunities to do something just her and I? In a singular piece called Mothering Memory, we unearthed and revisited her transcription from all those years ago and endeavored to read it together. Projected onto us was Land, a slow rolling hand-drawn animation marking the history of Kenya through a changing landscape. It was the central animation in the original work, so I wanted to honor that, the theme, and also I wanted the light of the projection to caress and hold us in the space as we read and shared. Of course, our childhoods are our childhoods, and memories don't change, but perhaps we change around them. It was delicate witnessing my mother revisiting her memories of her life, but also now, without it being a balance between my mother's and my father's stories, It became a balance between my mother's voice and my voice. We met each other that day as two women, two Black women, two Black intergenerational women, two Black intergenerational diasporic women, two Black intergenerational diasporic women with different relationships to the world, to the privileges and the violences of the world. We met each other there, and a new intimacy developed there. An example, in Mum's transcription, she spoke about the response my parents had received from my father's white family when the couple, controversially in Kenya at the time, announced their love. In this transcription, she says she supposed she should have been angry, but she can't remember being angry, ever. She remembers only being sad, disappointed, that they didn't see her for who she was. At the time of the performance, I was grieving a quite serious trauma after a life-altering injury and had been given counseling for this grief. In counseling, one of the main sticking points was that I simply couldn't admit anger, only hurt, sadness, disappointment. I refused to admit I was angry. Sitting with my mother, reading her words, both of us trying to rhythm our voices together around her words, I noticed something about the passing down of patterns of disavowal, about anger, and how we might now try to begin to voice it. And now here we are with these drawings. And a similar thing is occurring, I think, except this time through mark making. I embarked on these drawings to revel in the conversation, in the space between us, this movement and rhythm of our language, the seeing, the lack of seeing, the seeing in new light, the breathing, the breath, the familiar, the comfort, also the wounding, also the honoring, also the honoring. I draw mainly with charcoal or with pencil. Charcoal is visceral, it's full body feels, it's from the stomach, it's muscle memory, it's get it all out, release, rub, karoga, like stir. Pencil is perhaps softer, more cerebral, it's closer to the surface. It's hand and eye communion, it's focus, it's intimate in its physicality, it's stroking, pencil stroking page, mark making, intimate with paper. It's long form, it requires time, going over and over, returning and returning. And in that commitment, there's moments of embodiment, I think. When the thing you're drawing stops being a drawing of a thing and becomes the thing, or becomes another thing, but becomes it, and then becomes a drawing again, and then becomes another thing. Pencil drawing is a becoming. So in honor of trying to work out this thing I was feeling about my mum's presence, and also her leaving, her absence, I wanted to commit to these large pencil drawings. I don't know what they'll be or where they'll end. And I don't know, something is happening with the paper. It's not responding in the way I'm used to. Marks are dappling in areas that don't make sense to me, and I'm having to accept it and learn from it and let things go. It's making me draw looser, I think. Since lockdown, I've been thinking a lot about color. Color as a portal, not just here, but in my other work, where I'm contemplating future ancestors and new places and what freedom might mean and how we might need to stretch our imaginations to find it. Color is playing into that. So here, I play on my phone. Ooh, sorry. I'm so sorry. So here I play on my phone with ideas of color prior to touching the sacred page. I'm contemplating these two crimson squares, or this red, or this line. In a way, I return to these drawings to hang with my mum, but a version of her that soothes me the most. It's drawing mum, but the mother that lives perhaps within me. And this intimacy is a beautiful and a cherishable thing. And then, if we consider these drawings as frameworks of Blackness, Black womanness, and we regard the multiple histories, geographies, contradictions, and kinships that exist within my mother and I, they do not overlap, rather they press and rub together. Frottage, to borrow, play with, or consider Kagura Macharya's word, frottage. We are not the same, and yet, if we can remove the attendant functions and hierarchies of mother and child, we might perhaps begin to see new worlds forming within this intimate space. I'm going to end with one of my most recent finished drawings, a return to my mother's feet, for a show called To the End of Time, which explores the Big Bang Theory. They originally wanted the original Mum's Feet grounded from 2014, but I was uncomfortable about removing it from its original context for this show, even though I understood the reasoning, being that for all the theories that science offers about the origins of all of us, there's no more telling or vibrant or clear poetry than the image of a mother's feet grounded to the earth. So I decided to revisit this. I wanted to see how it would change through time, age, while keeping the framework the same. My mother's gait and my hand also have matured. So here's the new portrait of my mother's feet. One pencil, one watercolor, unified by a wash of sweet Kenyan tea. The pencil is a detailed map of how time has passed on my mother's body. I likened it, the repetition, it took to build up the solidity of the foot that balanced the paint. I likened it to the number of steps my mum has taken on this earth. The watercolor offers more of a spontaneous, living, breathing thing. It was quite a private, intimate work. Mum did object to the fact that I didn't wait till she'd had a pedicure. But yeah, it was a slow, private undertaking. And yet, we all come from the East African mother, so this drawing of my mum's grounded feet, they matter. Drawing also, pigment and mark making, takes us back to our earliest attempts to communicate, to lay claim to space, to ground ourselves, to seek intimacy, to say we're here. Science, the cosmos, the Big Bang, the universe, my mother's feet, grounded. We are here. We are here. Thank you.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I think I want to begin by just with gratitude for both of those sharings and for making space for me to share as well in such incredible company. I think the provocation from Dawn to share new or in development work really requires kind of courage, intimacy, vulnerability. And I was reflecting recently that I spend so much time trying to armor my work against consumption, extraction, exotification. And, you know, where is the space in which I write what I want to write, or I make what I want to make without thinking about it existing within potentially white spaces or under white gazes. And so I think I want to say thank you for the incredible generosity that you both shared in that gorgeous, courageous, intimate vulnerability. It was really moving and healing and joyous. Thank you.
And likewise, thank you for kicking us off in such a forced way.
I'm glad I got to go first, now I could just enjoy. So, oh yeah, great. I like this configuration. So the first kind of, invitation that I have for you both is for this, there've been several things from the kind of provocation that I've been thinking a lot about. And one of the things that I've been really focusing on is this idea of intimacy within Black studies, but also intimacy as a practice of Blackness and Black intimacies as practice. And actually, my PhD thesis is centered around this idea of intimate ecologies, called Intimate Ecologies, Queer Speculations on Pleasure, Blackness, and Decolonial Aesthetics. And the ways that these kind of intimacies become touchstones or touch points within our work. So what I've been considering whilst reading and sitting with your amazing work, because I had this wonderful experience to sit with it for the past few days or weeks, is this practice of Black intimacy, and wondering how it's present in not only kind of the products of your work, but process and practice. Where does Black intimacy kind of factor in? Does it factor in? Is there a process of Black intimacy that shapes a practice that feels grounded, I suppose, in something other than the places the work ends up?
Wow. Can I respond to that through what Phoebe presented in talking about the pandemic and what it's been like for us, and me in particular, without touch and being isolated from family and all of that? I was just incredibly moved by what you had to say, Phoebe. And the creation of the poems that I shared came along with the creation of these very intensely, I want to say, grieving, angry mourning poems about George Floyd and police brutality. There are also poems, the ones that coming out in February, are about Me Too dynamics, same-sex rape and harassment, child trafficking, all the shadows in our culture and world there. And I've just been so separate from family that it's just your honesty in talking about that process and having the opportunity to have your mother come and stay with you. I was sort of rescued. My godson is really like my son in this life, fetched me from San Francisco, and we were the first people sheltered in place in America, close to when you were sheltered, Phoebe. And I ended up living with him for a summer until I had to evacuate from the wildfires there. but
we've
having
really been through it, honestly.
Yeah. That's right.
For sure.
Come on.
I have not been home to Austin for 2.5 years. It's been interesting. I was on the Guggenheim Fellowship last year when I was sheltered in place. And anyway, but having the chance, I hadn't lived with my godson for maybe like 10 years. And I've known him since he was 5. Having some kind of physical touch and intimacy has been, that was powerful. But most of the rest of the time, I've been isolated, celibate, untouched, until very recently. But you know, what I was thinking, Phoebe, was just, yes, like reinitiated. But this idea of like your mother's feet, I just remember when my mom died 15 years ago, I was flooded with memories when I was really, really young. My mother was only 22 or 23 when she had me. And it wasn't about my recent life and memories of her. It went all the way back to my earliest memories of my mother. Her hair, her body. And it was such a powerful experience there. So we're always going to carry, in terms of intimacy and physicality, our mothers and our fathers. I mean, I was just looking in the mirror and seeing my mother so much before I got on this broadcast. It's like I could just feel her and see her there. In fact, I scattered her ashes here in Hawaii. She had a dream of coming to Hawaii and never made it, partially because she had a fear of flying. But years ago, I brought her here. I ended up here because I've been working on a project to do with 19th century Hawaii and the epidemics and pandemic there. But there's just been so much vulnerability around just physicality. and the sense of like being starved that way.
Mm.
So going even back to these poems and reading today, it's like, oh wow, touch is so important. You know, I grew up with lots of. I grew up in a desert in Southern California. Summer spent with big family in North Carolina, and physicality, wonderful touch, and closeness, and I realize now I don't consciously think of it so much, Amma, in response to you, but it's always there, as a buoyant, shoring thing of touch, family, all of that. It sort of helped to get me through this. We're still going through this chaos and upheaval. So I was just thrilled that you shared your process with that of coming from Harlem to London and being shut down. I just arrived in San Francisco, shut down, couldn't do any of my research and scholarship there. So I guess I'm pulling in a lot of what's actually happening to us in the present, Amma, rather than the theoretical part, because this has been such a visceral period for us.
Yeah.
But I think, I could write the poems I shared with you today in response to writing about all the heavy duty, painful things that I've never talked about so much publicly before, and felt it all pour out of me in the space of a couple months. I don't even understand how I wrote The World That the Shooter Left Us, beyond the grief I had for my assistant and friend's father being killed in a stand your ground shooting over a parking space there. And I kept asking myself, do I need to speak? Do I need to say something? It was so painful. I couldn't even stop crying, writing the poem, reading the poem for a poem a day. I don't even know if I'll be able to read the title poem when the book comes out. It's so emotional and painful for me. Eventually the man who shot my friend's father was convicted based on forensic evidence that he shot my friend's father through the mail, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But this idea that people can get away with killing someone else and walking away from it out of calling it self-defense is something it took a long time to wrap my head around. And then there was the summer of last year with George Floyd, and it all just came pouring out of me there. But the theoretical part, I don't know if I don't think it really. I'm just saying. But what Phoebe shared was just so much about the process that we're going to of reclaiming. Our mothers are our first window on the world, and that's never going to change. My mom's been gone for 15 years. I still feel like I look into my face and I see her eyes in my face and feel her presence there. So that it's powerful to me that Phoebe, that you came back to that you can find your whole journey there.
But I think that's the thing, like art making is such a, as you say, you had this visceral response to your friend passing, and then you were able to let it out through writing. And for me, that's very much what art is and what it does. Like if I can't make sense of something, I try and draw it, or I try and find some way. And I think that that's where Black intimacy is for me, is in the process of the making. And I think it comes through being honest about your grief, being honest about and certainly I've learned a lot through the comfort of Black intimacy about what grieving is and how how much it requires, and how I think in kind of Western culture, like European Western, we don't learn how to grieve and we don't learn how to do all of these things. And so I think that there's something in making marks on a page or I also find I'm a very disorganized, scattered reader, but I always find what I need to find in the words of Black feminists, or, you know, like I always manage to find the exact thing that is like, you know, needs to be kind of spoken, but I don't have the words to say it yet. So I think that that's also Black intimacy, is when you, you know, we all put stuff into the world and other people can glean from it, or like take it. So we share our experiences in this like vulnerable way. The performances with the women where we were reading together was very much about that. It was about saying, let's meet at this lighthouse. They were called the Lighthouse. So let's meet at this lighthouse and we'll figure out what to do there together. And yeah, like, so for me, everything is in the process of making, because the way art is that afterwards it goes to institutions that are not made for us. So then there's this very kind of disorientating thing that happens after you've had this vulnerable moment, this intimate moment, this sharing moment. You know who your people are, you know who you're speaking to. And then it goes to places that kind of discombobulate that. And I'm trying as hard as I can now to not make work about lack. Like, I think that for a while I was trying to make work that I was like, I'll put women on the walls of white male galleries, and I will, you know, like I'll like it was all about trying to push for them to see us in ways that, you know, they don't wish to, they're not going to, they're like, it's always going to, you know, and now every time I feel that that's happening, I stop myself and I'm like, no, pause. What are you actually trying to do here? Because it's not that, like, you think it's that, but it's not that. Like, that's not where you'll find grace or love or honesty or any of these things. And so yeah, so Black intimacy is in the process.
Well, and it's not feeding, I think, you know, it's not nurturing. Yeah, I think, you know, there's something for me around, when do we get to be intimate? When do we get to be vulnerable, right? And how can we be intimate and rageful, right? And intimate and griefful, and intimate and horny, and intimate and, you know, wanting to be alone. And how can we, there's so much kind of baggage, for want of a better word, right? There's so much depth, you know, and we bring so many ancestors with us, right? Like, bring so many ancestors with us into every single conversation, collaboration, chance meeting. You know, there's for me, there's no simple Black work, and I love that, you know, but it's also requires a kind of commitment and dedication, I think. And I think that, yeah, even in what I was going to share tonight, right? I first came with this kind of poetic piece that I had written for this space in a city called Margate, which is off the Kentish coast of England, which is a very contentious space racially, politically, in terms of class and economics. And I was riding into this colonial garden space, and, you know, riding into the colonial space. And I thought, you know, I want to share something that I wrote for me tonight. I want to share something that I wrote that makes me feel good, and that I armored it in some ways. I think it is quite ferocious, that piece. But in other ways, it was like a way that I could just be ferocious and just be sexual and just be thinking about ecologies of pleasure and futuring and Blackness, without centering the white wall, whatever that white wall may be.
I totally felt that. Like, I felt like you really loved reading it. And that was, and same with you, Cyrus. Like, I felt with yours, it was like you were like stroking yourself through your words. It was so beautiful, honestly. Like, and yeah, we need to do that. We need to be allowed and able to like love ourselves back to life, love ourselves through these, you know. And
yeah,
thanks for that, because I've never read the poems, maybe once before, the first poem, but not the other ones out loud before. But can I add my little bit of wisdom from of late? One of the things I'm doing all the time is asking if something benefits me, and then fully believing if it benefits me, it will benefit other people. It's like a new strategy of mine I've been sharing with my godson and other people. And I think it's revolutionizing something in me of saying, you know, having to say no because I've just become poet laureate of my state, and I'm sort of inundated. And like, what can I do for my state and also for myself? And I also wrote these poems very quickly, and were kind of amazed because they seemed like odds and ends of things. And I thought, well, there's something here with the poems I read. There's something here to go back to old bits of writing and things. So thanks for that. I mean, I'm trying to learn to do that, to do things that benefit myself and make me feel good. And I think of these poems as being like a sequel to my book, Beautiful Senor, that won the Lambda Award and got such love and support from all sorts of communities, that I'm older now and I can talk about romance and sexuality with more humor and honesty. Dawn. I can talk about male G-spots, but this is good. That's why it's good to get the work out a little bit and try it on. And thanks for the opportunity, Dawn, to feel that affirmation from other people. And one other thing I want to say, growing up in America in that kind of Black church tradition to a good degree, anything to do with bliss and pleasure, which I do believe is our birthright as human beings, but we do not hear that enough. So I thank you, Amma, for being a pleasure activist there. Is something that I wanted to do in my work, and especially these new poems. It's like, and also linking my early experience with my recent experience and feeling the continuum.
Yeah.
Feeling the continuum.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm going to come in with some questions from the audience.
Oh, cool.
But I'm also sitting here like, Dawn, this should have been like, we should have had a break, and then we should have come back and had like another 90 minutes to chat. But
just when it was getting sexy.
And then be up until 1 a.m. I'm going to come in with the first question. There's 4 beautiful questions here from the audience, but I like this first one, which is, for each artist, how do you edit such powerful themes with so much personal depth? How do you know what to share and what to keep? And I think that's such a beautiful question, because I would say as a somewhat, I don't know what is, age and careers are slightly odd, but I think as an artist whose work is starting to step into a more visible place, this question of what to share and what to keep the stakes become a lot higher, because you're sharing with more people, you're sharing to different kind of levels of desires of what your work is and what you are. So I wanted to start with this question.
Wow.
So I would say that what would I say? I sauntered in there, but without an actual answer. I would say
my coughing fit there. Thank you. I'm going to say, let's try. We come in with concise answers.
Concise answers. I would say to echo what Cyrus was saying about, like, if it helps you, it will help someone else. I think that there is, I think the line between self-indulgent and what's not self-indulgent is further away than you think. Like, I oftentimes think I'm just being super self-indulgent, like no one cares about this. I think speak to people, like talk, have intimate friends and people who you trust, who you can, because also you have to, I think, know how to protect yourself as well if it does become something that, you know, goes out in a way that you lose control over the narrative part, if it's like, you know, very autobiographical or whatever. So I think seek counsel if you're uncomfortable, but generally if you're nourished by it and you believe in it authentically, I think, yeah, authenticity also, like if you believe that it's, you know, authentic, and then
it is.
Then yeah, then
Right?
it's worth being in the world if you wish it to be. And then I think there's also time for privacy and cocooning and going into your shell and not giving everything away. There's time for that as well. So you have to know your own seasons, I think.
Yeah, because I was thinking as you were speaking that a big part of how I judge that is by practicing denial, practicing my no's. And my no obviously comes a lot harder than my yes. For a whole bunch of reasons, right? I think being conditioned female, I think being racialized, I think coming from an immigrant parent, and I think also this thing around will there be any more work, right? Scarcity thinking. So I think practicing my no has been a huge part of this, what to share and what to keep, knowing that I have agency, I have choice, and that some things can be shared in certain spaces, and then I have the right to withhold those things in other spaces. And that doesn't make me inauthentic or uncommitted, right? This thing of like kind of an artist code switching. How do you read the room? How do you put work into a space where you don't then leave feeling that somehow you've been robbed? And that's been a work of practice, getting burned repeatedly and then noticing the signs and then practicing my no's. And I think also, what are the things that I'm not seeing in the world that, you know, right before we came online, Dawn and I, who met at Bard, were talking about how amazing it would have been to have us as professors when we were in our early teens, right? So like, how do you are putting work in the world that you wish you'd seen, and then that creates a different space in which you say, I needed to see this work, and therefore it needs to be shared. But I'm also not obliged to share that work as well, which is another kind of tricky, I think it's a harder boundary when we're thinking about making work for various communities which are underserved. Cyrus, I'm coming to you for the last word on this.
Well, I guess I want to add that time is so important, engaging what you want to share. And, you know, I had a rough time with the book that's coming out in a few months. I really did. Probably the roughest time of my life with these particular poems, and vulnerability, and accepting that vulnerability via poetry or sharing your art is the way to go, but also being mindful of when you need to protect yourself. You know, I've given a couple readings in public and I thought, how the hell am I going to get through this poem or this reading? And then I I counsel I counsel my students, courage, but it is an incredible kind of vulnerability for me with poetry and standing up and being able to stand up in our own emotions and experience there. So I've had to negotiate the grief and intimacy and the Beautiful Senor project, which I wrote during the 90s and the AIDS pandemic. And I wanted to write love poems and honeymoon poems in the context of that. And I'm also writing a novel about the AIDS pandemic, and that was one of the reasons I was in San Francisco. So I've been reaching back and feeling the parallels and just being really taking time with myself, bringing up the memories, which are very close right now. 4 years ago, I was in San Francisco in 81 when it was first detected. Just taking time with yourself and also having close readers and people you trust, who you know what their biases are, and sharing like, well, what do you think of this? And how is this working? So that's what I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's so rich. It's great because I'm on the panel, but I'm also just like taking notes, for my own practice. Okay, we're gonna squeeze in one more quick question, and I'm gonna go with this question on grief, which we've touched on, but I think it feels like a beautiful way to kind of bring the conversation to a close, because I'm in my own work and in my life really trying to rebrand grief as a joyous activity, as an act of celebration and ritual, and not something that is to be kind of shunned or hidden away or done in private even. So how do you experience and portray the intersection of grief and intimacy in your work? I'm going to just say that part of it.
Okay. I'll talk about what I'm living through right now. After 30 some years of searching for any information about the death of my roommate from AIDS, I stumbled upon his obituary like a couple weeks ago. I had heard that he died here in Hawaii, and that was correct, but I had the time framework all wrong. So he died at age 36 here in Hawaii in a hospice. The rest of his family is dead. In my book, More Than Peace in Cyprus, I started to write a poem about him. That was joyous because we went to Europe together for the first time. We went to France, and Phil was this amazingly vivacious young man. And part of the grief and the celebration in the poem is called Wild to Be Seen Again, is the fact that our youth was unfolding in the middle of the pandemic, which is the AIDS pandemic, which is something he actually died from. And the AIDS pandemic has been like being in a war where you just didn't know what happened to certain people. So I'm kind of reliving that and trying to relate that to young people now, and said, this isn't the first time, I was a young person when a pandemic started and had to, so much affected it. So I haven't read the poem again, but I've been thinking about it so much because I just keep getting flashes of our youth and crying because it's been a delayed mourning for 30 some years, more like 35, So that's actually absolutely happening to me now. I don't know if I'm going to write another poem, but I sort of wrote one already that was in place for this moment that landed this past week or so. I'm a miracle that I'm alive, right? I lost very few people. I lost Philip, my roommate. I lost my best friend, who was a painter at age 28, Bethel Jameson. I lost Melvin Dixon and his partner. And that's mostly it for my circle. I do not understand the logistics of that. I left San Francisco in 82, came back 15 years later, and most of the people in my circle were alive. I do not understand it. So I celebrate them. Survivor's guilt is real and all of that, and one contends with it. But I'm going through this period right now of just beautiful memories of the people I knew. Beautiful times with Bethel in the studio, listening to Nina Simone, and, my youth. is invested in remembering and sharing in the way I'm sharing now. These people I love so much, that I get to, at least through art, access my feelings and emotions there. So that's what's happening to me right now. So it's a powerful question for me. And if I have tears still, I'm still crying right now. I'm still crying a lot about our youth. The fact that he didn't get to be more than 36 years old. It's amazing my friends lived even for a decade after all of that, considering we were at the sort of epicenter of everything. So that's my response.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think it's really lovely how you hold space, you say their names, you know, like it's like having libation for them here. I think that's really a beautiful
Well, thank
thing.
you.
And so thank you for sharing that with us also.
And I searched for so long. My first love, I can't find anything about him. He had cancer early in the 80s. So, you know, officially they could have said it was cancer, but since he died in 83 or 4, it quite possibly was AIDS, which might be the reason I can't ever find any information about, you know, what happened. So it's a strange experience of, you know, delaying your mourning for 30 years. But I realize you have to mourn every person one at a time. You know, like in our community, we're mourning Camila Aisha Moon right now. We're all mourning her because she was such a beloved person. So I'm also mourning my wonderful, wonderful student and wonderful poet. So we're always going to be we're elegists as artists. We're always going to be elegists, right? In some way or another. That's just an important part of our work.
I think that like when Dawn came with the title Intimacies, I took intimacies to mean vulnerability somehow. Like I immediately went to vulnerability. And when I went to vulnerability, I sort of went to grief, because I was like, if I'm being vulnerable, that means I am grieving past lives. I'm grieving, you know, the things in me that need healing. I'm, you know, that's where vulnerability kind of comes into its own. And then if I'm able to do that, then I'm able to do the spectrum of living. Like I'm able to then joy more, better, you know, clearer, safer. And so I think that's where the intersection is that intimacy, vulnerability, grief, and joy are all, you know, it's like a rhizome, I don't know what it is. It's a thing, but they're all completely linked, and they exist because the other thing exists. And ultimately, that's what art making is and does and facilitates and enables, I think.
That's so beautiful. What a beautiful allergy to art, in fact. I was thinking as you're both speaking that I don't have a lot of space, I think, for grief in my work, although in other ways it's all griefful. So I don't think there are dedicated shrines really in my work. I think it's more like mourning as a daily practice. And I think part of that is because of what you were touching on, Cyrus, how much our mourning is so intertwined with erasure, right? How much we're mourning people whose names we don't know, or whose the circumstances of their passing we don't know, or we know that somebody existed. And I think as a speculative writer, I feel like I do a lot of channeling of stories that happened and people that existed, and I have no ephemeral, no tangible proof, right,
that they
existed. And I think also working in and around climate climate change, as it's called, climate change transformation, ecological breakdown. So this is so griefful. It's so griefful on such a huge scale. Historical and futuring. So I almost don't have space in my body to hold the kind of depth of grief that is going on. I'm thinking about this being an age of grief. I've been thinking about what comes when I can hold that space and say we're in an age of grief. And what does that give permission to come to the fore or to exist? And I think interpersonal intimacies with my partner, with colleagues, friends, my many sisters, both biological and spiritual, but also my interspecial intimacies, right? With my houseplants, with the park at the top of my road, with home, the entirety of complex ecologies that is Ghana, and the ways in which those intimacies reassert we've done this before, right? We've done this grieving work. We've continued to survive. We've continued to find ways. There are models for this, even if they're not accessible to you right now. And that's just been incredibly life-saving, literally.
I feel like the ancestors are very curious how we're contending with this global situation we're in. You know, I feel that presence there sometimes, like, wow, kind of like with our media, it's like, we didn't have to go through that, but we're watching to see how you all are going to navigate into this new world that we're evolving into, that's being born out of our pain and confusion and chaos as to, you know, what's the meaning of our relationships with each other.
Yeah.
Now that they've become so vulnerable again, where every decision we make can affect other people so dramatically, right? But I have felt from the beginning, from my intense, like, I'm sort of caged, like in downtown San Francisco, that sense of like, okay, we're going to help you get through this somehow, because this world that's coming, that we're evolving to, is you know, worth participating in. It's kind of what I'm feeling back there.
Sorry, I just disappeared momentarily, but I think I'm back.
Welcome, back to you're back.
Conversation.
I just want to thank you all. This was a really amazing start to this week. Thank you so much for bringing us into your worlds of making, and for your deep considerations, really, of a term I think you all coined, maybe not, but this, you know, kind of really broadened it, but Black intimacies, or Black intimacy. And I think that I anticipate that those folks who are doing events later in the week will really pick up on this notion of what Black intimacy might mean in the process and in the experience of making. So I'm indebted to you for really going there, and for really being vulnerable. And I too have a sense in my imagination that there is a relationship between intimacy and vulnerability. So I appreciate you all. This has been really wonderful. I want to remind everyone in the audience that our next event, especially for those folks in Pittsburgh, our next event is in real life, on campus, kind of, under the tent at Shinley Square, featuring vocalist and performance artist Helga Davis and filmmaker Naima Ramos Chapman. And it's, I
I'm so jealous.
I know. I heard a sound erupt. And it is Wednesday, October 6th at 6:30 p.m. If you want to go, there is a limited capacity under that tent. So you should register now because we're close to being filled. I just want to say that. Thank you again, Phoebe, Cyrus, Amma. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful questions.
Yeah.